All right. So, welcome everyone to our Money con Ganas podcast. We have Josim, Ruben, Martin, and myself. Here, we started our Money con Ganas podcast to really help people and ourselves really have conversations about money, wealth, investing, saving. Not only with ourselves, with other folks to really have an understanding of what this all means to us and what our relationship with money is. We decided to start a new mini series on cryptocurrency. So that's what this episode is going to be about. This first episode is going to be Bitcoin specific in terms of what is Bitcoin. We have had a lot of questions in terms of just what cryptocurrency is, what does it mean, what is the blockchain, what does a Satoshi mean? So all these questions that we can hopefully start to answer and also just start a conversation so that people could have these conversations with other folks, really understand the space and then decide whether they want to invest, learn more, or not do anything with information moving forward. So I think this is a first introductory step into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And the goal here is just to give information, right? This is not financial advice. This is not something to tell you to do or not to do. This is just trying to give you facts, trying to give you information in terms of what it is. And then hopefully that just leads to future conversations. So just with starting on that, right? The conversation is just like, what is Bitcoin and the history of it? So just a quick start. I don't know, Martin, if you want to kind of start us off with like, when did Bitcoin start? Maybe what it is in your words so that we could give that information.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, Bitcoin was created out of a mistrust of central banks and the government during the 2008 and 9 Great Recession. Somebody by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto, whether that was one individual or a group of people, they went by that pseudonym. They basically were really disillusioned by what happened with the government bailing out the central banks and all the money printing that happened. They created Bitcoin, right? What we now know as Bitcoin. And so in a nutshell, basically Bitcoin is a decentralized peer-to-peer currency. So that's a lot to unpack. And we're going to, throughout this short little episode today, we're going to be unpacking a lot of kind of technical terms to try to make it as accessible as possible. So decentralized peer-to-peer currency. Decentralized in the sense that no one central entity can control Bitcoin. Peer-to-peer in the sense that we can transact with each other without a third party or financial intermediary. And it's also deflationary in nature. That was crucial given that Satoshi, whoever that was really disillusioned with the fact that there was a lot of throughout history, the US dollar has not remained integral to its mission of preserving value. So there will only ever be 21 million coins in circulation. And that makes Bitcoin deflationary by nature. So as long as there's enough demand, without even getting into why it's something people buy, the limited supply should create a supply shock factor whereby price increases. So it's a decentralized peer-to-peer currency that's deflationary in nature, and it runs on what we call blockchain technology. Blockchain is basically just a public ledger of transactions. So anybody here, anybody anywhere can trace back to the earliest transaction in about 2009, 2010, using the blockchain. So again, every transaction that has ever been recorded is on that blockchain, and it works by anybody around the world. We call them miners. They basically process transactions in blocks of data, and every block, whoever processes that transaction or all those transactions gets issued rewards in the form of Bitcoin. Without getting too much into the mining, that's basically what Bitcoin is in a nutshell. Freedom to transact in the world with each other without anybody having a say, without the Federal Reserve. Like for example, in the US dollar, that's controlled by the Federal Reserve, right? How much they decide to print or not. So its use case is that basically it protects purchasing power. We can transact with each other. We have freedom to do it anywhere in the world. It's borderless, it's international, but you might see why that might present a problem for, different governments or other entities, right? Because it remains a threat to kind of traditional finance. And in a nutshell, that's what Bitcoin is. I don't know if you guys want to chime in and discuss that or If you guys have anything else to say to describe in describing Bitcoin.
Just really quickly, y'all. Martin, can you help folks understand just in the simplest form the difference between what Bitcoin is versus what crypto is?
Okay.
And just break down, like, there's Bitcoin and then there's crypto, or like cryptocurrency, because sometimes in spaces they're used as synonyms or as if they're one and the same. And sometimes they're treated as different. So just like very basic level, if you will, like help us just clarify that.
Sure. So Bitcoin is a subset of the entire cryptocurrency space. It was the first cryptocurrency ever created. What we now know as cryptocurrency is much larger than just Bitcoin. It includes like something like 8,000 assets. But Bitcoin was the first ever cryptocurrency ever created. And so cryptocurrency it's kind of comes from two things: currency, in the sense that it's a currency we can transact with each other, we can pay with things, pay things using it. It's a medium of exchange, a unit of account, without getting too technical. And also, it was cryptographically created. So cryptography is like a practice in computer science where it's something, honestly, I'm not an expert in that, but basically everything that I kind of explained earlier with the blockchain, that it relates to that cryptographic subset of computer science. So Bitcoin versus crypto, it is the first crypto ever created. The creation of Bitcoin spawned the creation of all these other cryptocurrencies, including what we now know as like Ethereum, Dogecoin, Cardano, which are predicated on kind of different things. But it was the original, the OG cryptocurrency.
And then, so is it helpful to understand it, and correct me if this is not helpful? So is it cryptocurrency is money, and Bitcoin is like the dollar versus the peso, right? Like if Bitcoin is the dollar, Cardano can be like a peso, like there's different type of money currencies in that way. Is that like a one-to-one comparison? Or do folks need to go beyond their understanding of how they think about money, because the cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and the other coins world is just very different and there's no point of comparison?
So comparison helps us understand things, but the second thing you said exactly, it's really hard to compare like the US dollar or any other currency or liken one-to-one something, because like really crypto, like Bitcoin, for example, was created, if you read the white paper, it was kind of envisioned as a medium of exchange where I could buy something with it, or I could send money to somebody, but it's not really, the market hasn't really liked that narrative. Instead, it's been because of its deflationary properties, meaning there will only ever be 21 million coins in circulation, no matter what. The market has really seen it as like a store of value, like a digital gold, a gold 2.0. So that's kind of, even though you can use it as a medium of exchange. So I think your question really has to do with like, some people say like there's like 5 properties of currencies. Like we won't get into that, but Bitcoin can like suffice pretty much all of them, but it's pretty much known to be just like gold, like digital gold. And other cryptocurrency have different functions. They have smart contracts. They have different things that they aim to fulfill. Now, the market, whether or not they fulfill it, depends on developers and what the market sentiment is like. So it's really hard to say, to be honest. We'll see with time. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in on that.
Yeah, I think in terms of like the comparison, right? I think it's good, like Martin mentioned, to have that, but I think it's also important to try to envision or to not limit ourselves to like what has happened or what the traditional sense of monetary policies, just currencies in general, how we treat them, how we envision them. Just because there are so many other use cases, other potentials, it expands what we can do from something that wasn't feasible in the past, right? So yeah, I think it is important. I think it's good, just like you mentioned, Ruben, to do think about it in those ways, but also not to limit them. That way you're continually seeing the evolving nature of this market, and from the last 5 years, the growth has been significant in terms of projects, in terms of what people have envisioned, and then what they're doing now to like what the future holds. And I think a lot of those things are what we envisioned this series to be, right? A lot more of like those projects and more of those items going on. But yeah, it is crucial, especially when you're starting off, to at least have something to correlate back to. And Martin, earlier you were mentioning in terms of, this decentralized nature and kind of not wanting that. And, it's not a coincidence, right, that this white paper was released in 2008, right, at the start of like the height of the recession, right? So I think it's also good for people to understand like the climate that Bitcoin started, and like why it started, and what was going on in the world at that time period, and why people felt I don't know, jaded in a way, or very disillusioned with the way things were going, especially after the recession happened and then the years following to that. And that white paper was released on Halloween of 2008. And then the first activity happened that January in 2009. So it was very much so in the middle of this recession where these ideas came about. And I mean, the idea of like a cryptocurrency had been going on for much longer, but in terms of like something feasible, something working, that was Bitcoin. That's that time period. So January of like 2009 is when it started. And think about it now, right? 2021, like how much time has gone by. And just to quickly like have a sense of like where or when you learned about it. Like, for example, I learned about Bitcoin in 2013 when it was like one of the first like bull run, right? Of like, oh, this is like all over the news. And I remember hearing about it then, but not really understanding it. And it wasn't for years until I finally came back to Bitcoin and to actually learn about it and then to purchase it. So I don't know if any of you want to share when you actually learned about Bitcoin, just so that other folks don't feel like, oh, you didn't learn about it then, you can't learn about it now, or you missed the boat, which a lot of people have continually said. I think it's good to understand that a lot of people learn about things differently and at different time periods. But in terms of being able to take that information now and then moving forward, I think it's good to also know that we, all four of us, are at different stages, just like other folks are going to be at different stages in their like understanding of this.
I think for me it was there were 3 points. There was probably like about 2011 when we were still like undergrads, where I heard about it, right? Like where you kept hearing about it in a way where like, it's the way they phrased it, right? It was like, oh, it's a way for you to do illicit things, right? And so I think at that point I didn't inform myself, right, well enough to really understand what the purpose of Bitcoin was. And then there is a 2015 when, again, there was another session, right, where you kept hearing about, Bitcoin and then Ethereum, right? 15, 16, if anything. And it wasn't really until almost beginning of last year, if anything, when I started really diving into it way more, right? Where it was, like you said, the reading the white paper, then understanding like other cryptocurrencies, right? To understand what the projects were about. So I think that those are the time frames for me, if anything.
Yeah, for me, I learned about it about 2017, but I was still in college. I didn't have any capital. I was just like, oh shit, what's the fastest way, when you're 20 or 21, you're like, fastest way to get rich online or something, that's how I found it basically. But I never invested till like 2020 pretty much. So but yeah, I mean, global number of users that have Bitcoin, it's out of the whole population, it's like 3.9% the last time I checked. So it's talk about being early, it's an emerging asset class. It's also a technology. By the way, I didn't mention, I kind of implied it, but it's all lines of code. And that's kind of the beauty of it. So, if you most people might think, oh, it's one Bitcoin costs like $68,000 as of today. Well, you can actually buy like, I don't know how many decimal places where like you can buy $1 worth of Bitcoin. It's beautiful in that it's super divisible. Yeah. Unlike gold, right? And that's kind of like the narrative that the market has taken. This bull market that we've seen the past like year or two, 2021 has been one of institutional adoption. We've seen all these companies adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet, and it's countries like El Salvador legalizing Bitcoin as actual tender. Other countries on the run for that, countries like Canada and now the US approving institutional grade Bitcoin ETF, which is just an exchange traded fund. So they're opening it up to big money. Smart money is finally buying in. And the cool thing about Bitcoin is that even though it wasn't as legit as it is now, and it still has more ways to go to becoming more legit, it's the first time kind of in human history that normies and everyday people could front run institutions to this investment. So, but yeah, granted, I mean, no, you have to have internet, Wi-Fi. A lot of people in the world don't have that. So it's also a privilege to be in the space now and be invested now. So anyway, yeah.
Ruben, do you want to quickly mention in terms of like when you started hearing about Bitcoin and when you first bought as well, or when you thought about investing in it, if you have?
Yeah, I've heard about Bitcoin at different points, and it was always it was being referred to as this thing that was really, really ridiculous, and something that wouldn't be a thing, and it was almost the exact same thing as like people making fun of Instagram when Instagram was first made, and people making fun of YouTube of like, who cares about your cat videos on YouTube? Like it was with this like mocking paternalistic approach to it, that it was basically something that only there's like these folks that had nothing better to do were doing. And then over time it became gaining traction, but it was gaining traction I resonate with what Joasim said, that it was getting traction in terms of this like illicit underworld, like all these like hackers were asking to be paid on Bitcoin, and like kidnappings were going on, and they were starting to ask for Bitcoin rather than like whatever the currency was. So it was that kind of negative connotation to what it was, and who were the earliest adopters of the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency world, that almost made it sound like if you're a good person, you don't do that, right? Like if you're a responsible person, you're not asking questions and you're not interested in that. And to Martin's point, I think a lot of change has happened in the political landscape of the world that made folks be a little bit more critical about where like all those critiques that you're giving to cryptocurrency and to Bitcoin, that's literally how money has functioned. Like that is already what money is doing to the world. So like, what are you critiquing right now? Like, people dying out there for money is paying for wars, like all that kind of stuff. So like, if this is an intervention to that, and this is rising technology and folks coming together and saying, can we do something different? Because this money thing, the way that the world has been designed for money, isn't working for many of our communities, then why would we not be curious about that and asking questions around it? So I started seeing a lot of folks in my inner circle starting to lift Bitcoin and the possibilities of Bitcoin and why they were going to be investing in Bitcoin and like their insights for it. And, once things become realer when things get into our inside circles, right? So then I started having conversations with different folks, and really the conversation that made me want to be like, hey, this is for real was when Martin and I were at one of our mentors' homes. Basically they're like the chosen family of folks in the desert, and I had a long conversation with the Armijo family, specifically the Armijo dad, and Martin was sitting right next to us. And I think he started talking about his critiques about Bitcoin. And then Martin just did like a fucking like owl movement, turned his whole neck back, and it was like, what did you just say about Bitcoin? And then they just went at it. And I was like, holy shit, like the generational moment of a Latinx elder accountant who is in many ways the founder of accounting firms owned by Latinos in Southern California was going at it with like this recent Berkeley grad, stupid young, who had just started in Bitcoin. And every other sentence, Martin kept saying, you know, I'm just getting started. I don't really know this. Like, I'm learning about it. Like, I'm very new into this, but like, this is the research. And they were going back and forth. And it was just a very luminous moment that I was like, oh, this is a moment. This is a moment where like generations are co-creating with one another. They're learning from each other and they're trying to figure out how do they coexist in the world. And I was so moved by that I was like, I believe both of you. Like, I need to be investing in the stock market the way that Papa Armijo was talking about it. And I was like, and I need to invest in Bitcoin the way that Martin is talking about it, because both of those worlds aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And you need to become fluent in those worlds in order to navigate them. So that's really the catalyst moment for me that I was like, all right, let me start doing some research. Let me start being intentional. And then the thing that made me actually invest was a conversation that I had with my dad, where he was really struggling with the fact that he's at retirement age and he has no retirement plan. He has no savings. He doesn't own anything. So I was like, yeah, that can't be me. So I need to start investing little by little. And it was starting to make those moves. And all of that happened. All this story was like literally in the last couple of months. And now we're here. And I'm still understanding this. And that's why I chose this background, because I feel like there's no option anymore. You don't get to take the blue pill or the red pill, as in like you get to be in or out of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is already shaping the world. And either you're going to be actively involved in that, or you're going to be actively shaped by it. And I rather be involved rather than only shaped by it.
Yeah, that's super insightful, right? And the reason I posed this question and asked about it is because there's always like phases of adoption where people's experience is very different, right? Early adopters sometimes get the harsh end of the stick in terms of like criticize or like, oh, that's not going to work, that's going to fail, like, why are you putting money into this, or why do you believe in this? And then the more rapidly it starts to take like a mainstream shape, the less that happens, and it kind of situates back into like, why didn't I do this, or like, why are you so lucky, or like, how did you get in, or like, why did you look at this and I didn't get it? And the narrative changes, right? So I think it's important for people to understand that depending on where or when you learn about Bitcoin, you might have a different story and a different experience. And if you chose to stop there, then you might not continue to develop and have this clearer picture of like, oh, this is what it is. I'm actively choosing, like you mentioned, to participate or to experience it or to be a witness to it. But either way is going to go on, right? Either way is going to happen. Things are going to go and grow, and you could decide. But I think having that choice is important, because that question and then having that question posed, it was very much so in terms of adoption, right? So I want to kind of get us into that point of like, okay, 2009, like this was not even heard of, right? Like this was like it wasn't even Reddit back then. It was like these cypherpunk like messaging boards online that were like very niche to like engineers, coders, like all these people who were like in tech, right? So it wasn't even Reddit where like people are trolling nowadays, or Twitter, which is like a huge crypto community. This was very like down deep into the weeds of like technology, and it's been growing ever since. And with that adoption, change and improvement happens, right? So for people to understand that Bitcoin is this volatile asset, that is this volatile thing in the world, right? It's important for us to kind of bring some of that context, right? And it is volatile. It's important for people to know that it could rise really high, really fast, and it could drop down really fast as well. And that has been my experience in terms of people talking about Bitcoin, in terms of why they're scared or why they're not comfortable with Bitcoin. So I just want to bring something up and then let you all speak. So the compound annual growth rate, right? So if you just take the annual percent gains from 2009 to 2019, or from 2011 to 2021, right? What does that look like for Bitcoin? And a lot of people would be surprised that it's actually like almost 200% a year, right? So if you flatline the growth, the trend is up. When people are saying invest in the stock market, they're like, oh, long-term gains for index funds or for the S&P 500 is 10, 12% per year, right? So taking that same thing, you're telling Bitcoin over the last decade has been 200%, right? And you always have to know that past results don't equal future results. But that's just like a benchmark. That's just like something when people tell you it's volatile, it's like, well, it's been growing year over year, right? There are dips, there are highs, there's lows, whatever it may be. So what's your experience with that volatility, right? When people are trying to understand like what Bitcoin is, and like if we stand today, like Bitcoin's current price, like right now, it's over $68,000, right? When it first came about, it was a fraction of a penny, right? So it's hard for people to understand how something grew so fast over X amount of years. But like, what does that look like? How does volatility, like, what would you tell someone that has that question or thinks about it that way, where they're like, it's too volatile? And how do you help them find resources, or how do you help them understand what Bitcoin has done, what's currently happening, and what hopefully, I mean, a lot of us in our situation are hoping for it to continue to grow and be more adopted, right? So what would you tell them in that situation? Because that's a question that is brought up actually a lot, which is the volatility scares me from investing. Volatility scares me because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
I think it really depends on, to me, right? Like, at least from my perspective, it really depends as to how risk adverse you are, right? Like, in my case, right, some people might think about it as I'm gambling, right? Because I am putting a good amount on a monthly basis, if anything. In but I think at the same time, right? Like, for me, it's, I'm trying to also play the long term, right? Like, for me, like the way you mentioned it earlier, right? Like, in an annual basis, it's roughly 200%, right? On average, per se, right? But that also, I need to consider that, right? And really say, okay, well, how, can how many times can that continue to be the case, right? For how long can that happen? And so for me, it's just, putting little by little, playing the long term. And I think I've actually had conversations with previous coworkers in the past where, uh, part of this, it's, we need to really consider, right? Like, okay, well, maybe you put in money that, like, you're not going to need anytime soon, right? Because if you end up putting some of your money that you're going to need soon, right, like, that's when it can affect you, right? Like, you're talking about the volatility, right? It drops drastically, that within that month or so, right, when you actually need the money. So it really depends as to how you set up your own case, right? So that's why, for me, I'm playing the long term, which it will go up, it will go down, and it might go down again, but I know that eventually it will rise, right? So at least that's what I've been convinced to at this point. So I think some of the things that I would like to point out, and that y'all can, like, help me with, are, what are some of the resources that y'all think we should, people right, should be reading, right, in order to inform themselves as to, like you mentioned, like the 200%, right? What happens with like, the technology, things like that. So
Yeah. To address Francisco's question real quick, what I always tell people when they ask about the volatility, or to be honest, I say this, like, scared money don't make money. That, granted, that's from a position of privilege to be able to say that, to have spare capital to invest, and to protect your purchasing power. But volatility is also the premium you pay for being early. You mentioned 200% year over year growth. Yeah, on average, exactly. Like, Bitcoin has been the highest performing asset class in human history. No other, and a lot of people call it a bubble, right? That it's eventually going to blow off top. Well, we actually see like 4-year cycles where we do see explosive growth followed by a huge correction, but then eventually we do the same thing. And year over year, we still, long term, it's still kind of up only, so to speak. So if you're in it for the long game, like Drasim, like pretty much most of us here, then you really don't stand to lose, especially now that smart money is getting in. It's just too bullish of an asset class not to be invested. What I tell some other people too is that you're more at risk not being invested in crypto than you are if you weren't. So I messed that up, but you guys know what I mean. Because of inflation, right? All the money printing that's going on now, the macroeconomic trends are such that, our wages aren't keeping up with our cost of living. So really, crypto can be seen as a kind of life raft, one of the few ones we have left before this fucking, disaster of capitalism that has been unfolding for hundreds of years kind of implodes, if it does. So as far as resources though, yeah, I mean, it's such a nascent space, such a new space, that it can be overwhelming for people that are just starting to get into the space. And so where do you turn to, right? I advise just folks to just do a couple of Google searches. What is Bitcoin? What is crypto? Just read a few articles, read a few blogs, a few things. Go on YouTube. Just be wary of some people. They can be pump and dumpers. Don't get sucked in by the euphoria. And Twitter is where everything happens right away. Like, it's crazy how the amount of news that comes out of Twitter every day. It's like a news first channel. The one thing I will say though is that I want to emphasize that as human beings, like, we're hardwired to be terrible investors and terrible traders. Because when we see an asset like Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency shoot up, in a few days or in a few weeks, we instantly get FOMO. That's just how we are. We follow the herd. That's what's safe. But that's terrible. Like, you shouldn't be chasing green candles as far as like financial strategy goes. And then when we see dips, again, we feel the same thing. It's fear and greed. We feel fear, right? Because, oh shit, let me salvage. I already lost this much from what I put in. Fuck, like, let me salvage what I can. But it's so we're hardwired to think that way, to follow the herd, to kind of, we seek and we crave resolution. But so it's just very tricky. And a lot of people that I've kind of convinced that to get into crypto, we had that mid-cycle correction this past summer. They sold at the bottom and they at a loss because they were just like, they got scared, even if they were in it for the long game. So that's one thing I want to point out. Just, don't be scared. If you want, buy it and forget it, set it and forget it. But there's so many resources. It's kind of hard to point to one thing.
Yeah, I think in terms of going off of that is one of the things is go off of information, but don't feel like you have to act on it right away, right? So Martin just kind of said FOMO, right? So fear of missing out is huge, right? Because then you feel like you missed the boat, you didn't catch it on time, whatever it may be. 2017, that happened. Clearly, Bitcoin hit new all-time highs, right? This time around, it's happening, right? People feel like they need to catch up or get in it. But you need to figure out a strategy and plan, just like with regular investing, and stick to it, right? And don't have that fear of like, I missed out, or I need to catch up, or I need to take extra risk to like make up for something, because you don't need that. So That would be first and foremost. Second of all, I think everyone should at least take a look at this book called Digital Cold. Bitcoin and the inside story of misfit and millionaires trying to reinvent money. So this is not only going to tell you like the history of Bitcoin, but also things that happened along the way from early mid 2008 probably to around 2013, 14, around that time period. So at least it'll give you a good insight of like everything that was going on, from exchanges, from individuals who are very important into creating the space and pushing it forward. And that is a good starting point. I think Martin mentioned it. Twitter is really great, but there's also really bad people and accounts there. So you just have to like filter out the fluff, and it's hard to do and hard to say, but we'll get in future episodes, we'll definitely get more into like, okay, we're going to share some of the accounts or some of the people that we follow, and you could feel free to look them over and not, but start doing your own research. That's the biggest thing. You need to be confident in yourself and be confident in your decisions to do this. So when I made the decision to buy Bitcoin and crypto, I have no one else to like fall back on but myself. Like this is all like the research I did, this is everything that I feel like I understood, and this is what I wanted to do. So that's like hyper important as well. You can't rely on others, and you can't rely on like, oh no, just tell me what to buy or tell me when to sell or buy, whatever it may be. It's like, no, you have to do this and be self-sufficient enough to understand what you're buying and why you're buying it for. Another book is the Bitcoin Standard. So I think that's also a good book to start. There's one, The Internet of Money. That's another good book. Crypto Assets. So I read a lot, so that's why books are here. So Crypto Assets is another book. So all these books, just give them a glance, and if you find information good, then you could continue to read. But at least Digital Gold would be like my first book where I would tell you like start there. And these resources are only going to grow because there's more and more people in the space now. And with that being said, you have to be able to be comfortable in not knowing everything, and you might have to make a decision, right? So that's another thing where it's like you can't have 100% of the information in a space that is not 100% developed, right? Cryptocurrency looks so much different now than it did a year ago, than it did 3 years ago, than it did 5-10 years ago. So if you need 100% of the answers, it's going to be really hard for you to make any decisions. So you just have to be okay with having some uncertainty and not knowing everything and how things are going to play out. So again, we're not saying go buy anything or go trade or go do anything, but what we are trying to do with this series is get you to go get informed. And as we're coming up to the close of this first episode, I think that's the main key takeaway is like, please do your research. Please look up resources. Please messages us or like send us any DMs with questions or any topics within crypto that you would like us to cover. I know some of the things we're going to be covering is more of like the trading, technical analysis, how to avoid scam coins, or how to look for projects that have more viable like products on the pipeline versus something that's just like a hype coin that might be put out today and then everyone loses their money tomorrow. So some of these things we want to continue to talk about, but they can't be covered in one episode. Now we'll have like a few hours worth of content and just barely be touching a lot of the information. So this first episode, hopefully we get more questions in, more suggestions, so that we could continue to build on this topic, but also to help you understand what crypto is, what Bitcoin is, and what the space looks like now. I don't know if Jocelyn, Martin, or Ruben, if you have anything else to add, but I think this would be a great segue to stop and then hopefully put out the second episode soon.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate y'all being willing to move at the pace of us wanting to make sure that folks are understanding what this world is. I think maybe in a future episode, what I would love to explore with you all is we come from communities that have overwhelmingly experienced violence and oppression from the current capitalist system and money system. So is this cryptocurrency direction, is this Bitcoin world how are we making sure that that's going to have more justice? How are we making sure that our communities will have healthier and better outcomes as they're experiencing this? And it's very much in line with me with this whole like metaverse that was recently announced or whatever. Like, I'm so curious in what ways can the metaverse move us towards more justice, more belonging, healthier qualities of life for our communities. So I'm excited for us to delve into those topics, not just from the technical aspect of what is it, how do I buy it, where do I invest, when do I sell, but also what are the cultural and political implications of these conversations and these directions of new worlds developing. So I'm excited for those conversations that we'll have ahead, but just a lot of gratitude for this first conversation to introduce us and open us up into this crypto world.